So by now you've probably heard about the Change Healthcare System fiasco that's going on, the cyber attack that was reported on February 21st of 2024. Currently, when I'm recording this, it is February 29th of 2024, and their systems are still down. Now, this is affecting thousands and thousands of payers, patients, providers, because Change Healthcare is a subsidiary, I believe, of United Health Group. And we all know United Health Group is a big company that deals with so much other groups or who have bought out other groups. And so Change Healthcare is one of the leading healthcare technology companies. And so they deal with a lot of things, which when I was doing my research, there are so many things that they deal with. But as far as with medical billing stuff, they deal with eligibility and verification, claims processing, and reimbursement. And there is several other things that I'm probably forgetting that they also deal with. I know they're kind of like a clearinghouse, but they also do plenty other things. Now, in that field or in the medical billing field in healthcare, we rely heavily on cloud-based systems like the Change Healthcare system. It helps us be more productive, and we get to do things faster and more automated. And so because of this, you and your company may not know what to do when things like this happen. Now, we hope that things like this don't happen, but as we can see, it is a possibility. It can happen. And we rely heavily on these systems, but we don't have anything in place, or some of us don't even know what to do if we had to do things manually. So the video that I have for you today was one that was planned, but it kind of goes along with what is going on now in this time, because we're going to be talking today about manually calling and speaking to payers. I know that is something that we don't like to do, but whether something like this happens or not, we're going to have to call and speak to payers. So I like to know how to do things manually, and today's video I'm going to give you some tips on speaking to the payers, because you're going to have to do it. So keep watching. So first, let's talk about the two reasons that you probably may call payers. And those two reasons are for eligibility and verification of benefits, and also for claim status, following up on the claims, or if something was denied, or if you wasn't paid, or whatever the situation is. So we're going to break it up into those two parts. Now, here are some tips for me to just start off with. The first thing is to make sure that you gather everything beforehand. Now, there have been plenty of times that I have just jumped up, oh, I need to call the insurance. I've jumped up and just called, and then they answer quicker than I anticipate them to, and I don't have anything that I really need. Like, I know I had to call them, but I jumped up too quick, and I wasn't prepared that they were going to, answer so quick, because we all know that the insurances like to leave you on hold forever. And so you figure you have time, and you can look for this and look for that, but just try to be prepared beforehand. Get everything you need before you call, so when you do call, you can just address everything one time and get it done. The second one is to know what you're calling for. Now, that may sound a little crazy, like, of course I'm going to know what I'm calling for, but sometimes you don't. You pick up the phone to call a payer about, let's say, a claim. You want to know the status of the claim. Now, mind you, you didn't do your research before that. So you saw that a claim wasn't paid, it's still outstanding, but you didn't check to see if maybe it was rejected in the clearinghouse, or maybe someone else dealt with it and you didn't look at the notes, or something to that matter. So you need to know exactly, precisely what you're calling for, what the question is. Then make sure you do as many patients as you can. So again, like I told you, sometimes I would just pick up the phone and call about this one patient. This one patient has Cigna. I call Cigna, get the information for this patient, and then I hang up the phone. And then a few minutes later, I noticed that I needed to call about another patient who has the same Cigna. Now, again, if I had made sure that I was, got everything together, prepared myself, then I would have seen, okay, I have 5 patients I need to call for Cigna, 2 patients I need to call for Blue Cross Blue Shield, 3 patients I need to call for United Healthcare, and I gather them all together and I make sure that I deal with all the patients at once. Now, lately, when you call payers, sometimes they give you a limit on how many patients you can call about or how many claims you can call about. So if you have one patient who has 2 claims that you need to call about, and then you have another one who has 3 claims, they may only let you call. I've noticed that the cap is like 3 sometimes, but sometimes I squeeze in extra ones. And that falls into my fourth tip, which is to be kind. And don't call when you're annoyed or impatient. And I'm actually speaking for myself at this time because sometimes you can call representatives and they can just really irk a nerve. Sometimes they don't answer the questions that you want to get answered, or they run around and go through a whole thing, and you can start to get annoyed and start to answer snappy and stuff like that, and that's not going to help you at all. Remember, they're the ones that are in control, and if you're being rude or being snappy at them, they will not give you the information that you want to receive. And also, that reminds me that when I said to make sure you know what you're calling for, when you call a representative and they have a spiel that they have to go through, they'll say, oh, we received this claim on this date, and it was received then and processed this date, and then we did this. Like, they will go through this whole spiel of stuff when you're probably just calling to find out, well, why wasn't a specific line paid on that claim? You don't need to know all that other stuff because you actually have the remittance advice in front of you. So you don't need to have the whole when it was processed, when it was this. That's taking up time. So I normally, when I call and I ask for something, if I need just to know why this line was not covered, I would specifically say to them, I'm calling because I need to know why the second line, the third line, whatever the code is, was not covered. So I can stop them in their tracks from going through this whole long rigmarole that I don't need to hear because I already have the information in front of me. So here is the info that you need to have with you when you are calling for these different things. So again, we're going to go through eligibility and benefits if you're calling about that, and then we're going to go through claim status. So first and foremost, they will probably ask you what the tax ID number is or what the NPI number is. And this is either for the individual or for the practice. Now, if you're going through calling them, at first you'll probably have to go through the IVR, and this is probably the information that the IVR is going to ask you. And IVR, if I'm not mistaken, is their interactive voice response system. If it's wrong, I'll put it on the screen. But you have to go to the IVR. So they're either going to ask you about the tax ID or the NPI of the individual or the group. Then the IVR may ask you what is the patient's ID number. You might have to put that in. And then they might ask you the date of birth of the patient. You might have to put that in. Now, there are some systems where you can bypass all of that and you don't have to put that information in. For some of these payers, I just try to get to the representative and then give them all this information, because I hate when I put in all the information and then when I actually start to speak to the representative, they're asking me the same information over. And I'm usually like, didn't I just put all of this in the IVR? Which again is a waste of time. What we're trying to do is speed up the process here so that we don't have to be taking a long time to get the information that we need. So I usually just try to get to the representative as soon as I can, and then I put all of this information in. But they probably might ask you for the patient's ID, or they're going to ask you for the patient's ID and the date of birth. They'll ask you for the patient's name, and this is when you're talking to the representative. They'll ask you what the patient's name is, what the patient's date of birth is. They may ask you who is the rendering provider. I find that nowadays this piece gets a little confusing because depending on how your provider is credentialed, it will determine what they're looking for. So some of these payers may ask you for the NPI or the tax ID, like I said, of the individual provider, whether or not they are by themselves or with a group. Or they might ask you what the group NPI number is. So to me, I find it to be very, very confusing, because if a provider is a part of a group, Now, I think initially you should ask for the group information and then you may ask who the individual provider is. But that's just me. They don't have to do that. And trust me, they don't do that. So it gets a little confusing, but just make sure that you have both or you have all of that information there. So when they ask you, you can tell them what that is. They also tend to ask you, especially initially when you first start off the conversation, if they can get your name and your callback number. I do not know why they ask that, because out of the millionth time that I've called a payer, probably when the phone has disconnected, maybe 2 times they've called me back. All the other times I have to call back and go through the whole thing. I have had some of them, like I said, maybe about 2 of them, who've actually called me back when the phone hang up, but that's not usually what's going to happen. So I'm not sure why they ask you that, but they're going to ask you for your name and a telephone number to call you back if we ever get disconnected, like they like to say. Then if you're calling about eligibility and verifications, like I said, they're going to ask you about what coverage you're wanting to know and all of that stuff. So make sure you watch this video right here, which I went over eligibility and verification and what you should know, what you should ask, and all of those good things. Make sure you watch that next so that you can know what they're going to ask you and be prepared in that way. So if you're getting anything from this video so far, please like the video, comment below, and watch it to the end, because that really, really helps me out. It helps it to get to other people who are interested in medical billing. And I know medical billing is a specific topic that not many people may be interested in, but I'm really trying to get these videos out to people who want to know more about billing and what I can do, or anything that I can do to help. I would really appreciate that. So the more you like the videos, the more you watch it to the end, YouTube will send the videos out more and they can help someone else. Now, including with all of those things that they asked beforehand, if you're going to ask about claim status, here are some additional things they're going to ask you about. The first thing they're going to ask you about, what is the date of service? Whether it is a specific date or whether it is a range. Now, most of the time we use a specific date. It's like one date of service, February 1st to February 1st. Sometimes we have like a range, and it might be, February 1st to, I don't know, July 2nd, for whatever reason. Now, what you have to be careful with is you may put that range in your system and send that out on a claim. But sometimes the payers don't, recognize that. And so you may put February 1st to July 2nd or whatever I said. And in their system, they only processed it as February 1st to February 1st. So when you call about it and you give them the range, they're not going to see the range. So you might just have to say, okay, well, is there a claim from February 1st to February 1st? And then they might be able to find it that way. Then they're going to ask you the billed amount. And this one can be pretty tricky as well, because if you build several dates of service on one claim, so it's not a range, but it is, let's say, February 1st, February 2nd to February 2nd, February 5th to February 5th, they may split up those claims. So in your system, it shows that it's all on one claim and the total claim amount was $600. But if they split it up, it may be split up by each day, and they split it up by $200, $200, $200, because that's how it was priced for each day. So when you call and they ask you, well, what's the billed amount? And you say $600, they're going to be lost, because they're not going to see $600. They only see $200. Instead of saying that, a lot of them like to say, well, there's no claim on file. So you are going to have to say, well, is it $200? And then they'll probably say, oh, yeah, I see $200. So you need to make sure that if you put on more than one date, or if they're saying that they don't find a claim, but you know that there are several lines, that they may have split it up for whatever reason. And it could actually be the same date of service that they split up. Then you may have to give them the claim number. And this is not always needed all the time, but I find that when I have the claim numbers, whether I got it, through calling before, or if I actually have a remit in front of me, I usually just give them the claim number instead of having to go through the rigmarole of, what's the data service, what's the billed amount, all of that stuff. I just give them the claim number and they pull it up. I've had times when I call about a claim, give them all the information, and they say, oh, it's not on file, we can't find it. And then I give them the claim number, and oh, it magically appears. And that is because, I guess, I don't know how their system works. Sometimes they say, oh, well, it's not in this system, and it was in that system, and it's always a story. But if you have the claim number, give them the claim number. That would help speed up the process, and you can get your question answered sooner. Now, here are some more tips for you to remember when you are calling the payers. Number one, make sure you take a reference number. This can be numbers, letters, a combination, the person's name, the date for that day that you're calling. It can be all types of things. But just make sure you get a reference number because they are supposed to be documenting everything that's going on. And if you need to call back about that specific claim or anybody else, and not even about the claim, about, eligibility or you're verifying coverage, if you need to call back, that reference number can be pulled up and they can see what was spoken about with the other rep. And even if somebody else is calling other than you, so if you're the one who started off the call, you made the notes, you have a reference number. If someone comes behind you and they call about that same claim or that same, eligibility verification, and they use the reference number, then that rep can pull up that information and figure out what was spoken about, and then y'all can go from there. So always, always, always get a reference number. Then you make sure that you document. Document whatever was said, whatever was performed, done, whatever. So if you're calling about eligibility and verification and they say for this specific procedure, you need a pre-authorization and, it's going to be 20% and it goes to deductible, make sure you put a note in the patient's chart, whether that is a physical chart, electronic, however, make sure that you document as clearly as possible. Now, you kind of want to shorthand it, like you don't want to have to write out a whole long book, but you want to make sure that you have the pertinent information. So again, if someone comes behind you and needs to deal with that case, then they can deal with it. And you also need to make sure that you set a follow-up date. If this is something that you need to follow up on, so not necessarily eligibility and verification, because you're just trying to find out some information about what's covered or if this specific code is covered or whatever the situation is. But if it's for a claim that you're trying to see what is the status of it, you figured out that they received it and it's still processing, and they say it should be processed in 30 days, then you need to make a note for yourself or for whomever to follow up in 30 days. Give them a date. I called February 1st. They said to follow up in 15 days. So on February 16th, I'm going to call back again. There are many times that I personally have passed the date and then you go even a month later and it's like, oh, well, I should have called earlier. And you kind of want to make sure that you don't do that all the time because you can then miss your timely filing limit or your time to appeal, and that would mean that you would miss out on the money that your provider should be getting. Now, comment below if there is anything that I missed that you do when you're calling payers. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.